Honorable Chairman Huang Kunhui of Huang Kunhui Education Foundation, and Honorable Deputy Minister Lin of National Science and Tech Council, distinguished guests, dear friends in education, good morning. Good morning. Thank you for spending your time with us this morning. And we have a very serious seminar title today about the big AI era and innovation in K-12 education. But if we take away the big words, the main character today is not AI. The main character is the child sitting in the classroom. Our children grow up in a digital world. They sweep a screen faster than we find our reading glasses. But sometimes they still bring home very human questions like, why is this so hard? And why did I fail my test? And now, with AI in their lives, they simply ask, can I use ChatGPT to find answers? Or will I get into trouble? So when we talk about AI in education, we are not just talking about technology. We are talking about their pressure and their chances, and about whether the new tool will help them feel more confident or more confused. In my organization, Taitra, I often tell my colleagues, don't be afraid of AI. Make AI work with you. Use it to challenge old habits. Let it handle the routine work so you can focus on rethinking how we work and to free up time for what humans do best, to care, to create new possibilities. I believe schools face the same challenge. AI will not replace teachers, and it cannot replace parents, but it will change daily life in the classroom. The key question is, do we just let this change happen by itself, or do we shape it together based on clear values about children and learning? If we use AI in the wrong way, we create more noise, more copy-paste homework, more stress for teachers, and bigger gaps between students. But if we use it well, we gain something very rare in education: time. Time for teacher to sit with a struggling student. Time to listen to a worried parent. And time for teachers to work as a team instead of fighting alone in each classroom. This is why today's meeting is so meaningful. We are not here to do a technology show. We are here to ask some very practical questions. What should really change inside the classroom? How can AI support teachers instead of becoming one more burden? How do we protect our children and still leave room for innovation? On these questions, we are very, very fortunate to have Professor Ing Morena with us. She has spent many years exploring new learners, teachers, and AI can go together. What I appreciate most is that her work does not stay alone only in theory. She and her team work with real schools, real teachers, and real students, and keep asking a very simple question: does this actually help children learn better? For Taiwan, which is now exploring its own path for AI in K-12 education. Her experience is especially meaningful. And on a personal note, last week, Berlin Philharmonic performed in Taipei, and I was fortunate enough to be invited to join the concert. And at the end of the concert, it was absolutely amazing and heart-touching. And so at the end of the concert, I told myself, this is something AI cannot replace. So there are so many things we can still teach our children to try to aspire to. Finally, on behalf of the Huang Kunhui Education Foundation, I want to thank all of you for being here, for caring about our children, for being willing to rethink how we teach and learn in this new AI era. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Inge Molena.
Good morning, everybody. And it feels like good night to me, but I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I really would like to thank the organization and the foundation for the invitation to speak here. I'm extremely honored to be here in Taiwan, and I'm also very impressed by the strategy that has been put forward already here in Taiwan around technology and AI in education. And I had the pleasure of having a meeting with some of your work and with some of your professors previously, and especially the Taiwanese Adaptive Learning Platform is very impressive in its current form. I'm very excited to learn more about it this week. And also the Digital Learning Enhancement Plan really looks like a forward-reaching strategy, and I'm extremely happy to be here and learn from you also over the course of this week. I also would like to assess that the theme of this conference, Revolutionizing K-12 Education in Age of AI, Curriculum, Teaching and Assessments, aligns very closely with the work that I do as a scientific director of our National AI and Education Lab in the Netherlands. And as was put forward already, we are very much working on how to make artificial intelligence a shared policy between teachers, learners, and technology. And that's also why I chose the theme today, a co-evolving social technical system where we bridge learners, teachers, and artificial intelligence together into one vision. In this talk, I will talk about the current applications of artificial intelligence in education, and I will foreground the developments. But before I do so, I would like to tell you a little bit more about the Netherlands. So I think you may know the Netherlands of windmills and tulps, but we also are a country that is known for its bicycles, and I believe most of our bicycles in fact come from Taiwan. So thank you. And also a warm thank you by our children, because our children bike to school every single day. So what you see here is a Dutch bike path of children going to school, and this is a common practice, also partially made possible by Taiwan. We are a very small country, but in fact, I believe the size is quite similar to the size of Taiwan. You outnumber us, I have to say. I think you're quite a little bit bigger than we are in number of people. We share a shared history with the Netherlands having made a trade point here in Taiwan a long time ago. And I believe there's also a relation already on the educational system. Already from a historic perspective, the first schools here in Taiwan were co-founded with some of the Dutch people coming here 4 centuries ago. In fact, we share a shared interest in artificial intelligence and education, and I very much look forward to exploring that shared interest further. So thanks again for the invitation. If we look at artificial intelligence in education, of course, it's important to note that artificial intelligence, in fact, is a much larger development that is going on right now. And our scientific council coined artificial intelligence as one of the system technologies. And that means that a system technology changes our society profoundly, and it can be compared to the steam engine, electricity, and computers in that sense. And we know from a historic perspective, if we're looking at situations where we have a system transformation, that there is a potential for social unrest, and many questions are being asked about what the future in fact will look like. This, again, I think today is the case. What is interesting to note is that all of these other system transformations went along with an extension of the educational system, and specifically an intensification of the educational activities within K-12. So it's not strange that we are gathering here today to think about how AI is in fact impacting our K-12 education and what is needed to increase the efforts in that space. It's also important to note the educational perspective. And in the educational perspective, I'd like to highlight a number of different points. Today we are facing two different types of artificial intelligence. On the one hand, we have artificial intelligence that is in fact being developed and designed for education, which I will refer to as educational artificial intelligence. On the other hand, ever since the release of ChatGPT, but also before that, there is general purpose artificial intelligence, which has not been designed for education, but has widely received access, especially since the release of ChatGPT and large language models in 2022. And this distinction is important because artificial intelligence designed for education is created for and oftentimes by educators versus artificial intelligence that is general purpose technology that can be used in education but requires a very profound thought process of how to use it. Therefore, I'd like to emphasize in this talk that from an educational perspective, it's really important to keep the scientific knowledge that we have about learning and teaching very closely related to the designs that we're making with artificial intelligence in our educational fields. I also believe it's very important to design together with teachers and learners to make sure that we actually develop solutions that help teachers work well within their classrooms, and really finding that connection between how teachers work, their pedagogical and didactical strategies, and the use of artificial intelligence. And I'll try to explain how we're doing that in the Netherlands and sort of see if that is potentially a method that can be reused here as well. That's also why in this talk, and especially at the end of this talk, I will talk about how teachers and artificial intelligence can in fact collaborate together. And I hope that we can then share perspectives on how to move forward on this important theme. Most of the examples that I'll use come from the National Education Lab Artificial Intelligence in the Netherlands. So I'll briefly introduce the lab to you to give you a bit of an idea of the context that we do our work in. The National AI and Education Center was founded in 2023 by the Dutch government to ensure that schools in the Netherlands are in fact going to use AI in a positive way, and to make sure that the opportunities that AI is offering are in fact being used in K-12 education. It's also there because the Dutch government acknowledges that there are some risks to using artificial intelligence in education. And we feel it's important to help schools really use the opportunities, but also mitigate the risk. So therefore we have this lab. It's situated at the Radboud University, but it's a national center for expertise. The work that we do is combined in two different programs. We have a co-creation program in which we create innovative AI practices together with teachers and school leaders to make sure that the questions that they have regarding artificial intelligence are in fact foregrounded in the development of these new technologies. We also work very closely with scientists and with businesses. And within this triangle, we develop innovative solutions of artificial intelligence in classrooms, and I will give you a few examples throughout this talk today. On the other side, we also have a scientific program, which is mostly related to looking at how we can use the existing scientific knowledge and integrate it in the usage of artificial intelligence in classrooms. We have 5 different teams in that program. One that's directed at looking at the pedagogical and instructional values and knowledge that we have about education and how that can be connected to the technology. We also have a team that looks at professional development of teachers and how that can be supported by the technology. And these two disciplines are the most important elements in driving the technology development that we support. Then we also have, of course, a team on artificial intelligence technologies, looking at which technologies are best used for which purposes. We have a team that looks at sustainable data, making sure that privacy and security is in place, but also making sure that our technologies are in fact sustainable from an energetic perspective. And we have an embedded ethics team that profoundly looks at the ethical questions related to the use of AI and really tries to make sure that the educational values that we hold deeply in our educational system are in fact not overruled by the use of technology. So every time we're developing a new technological solution, we value whether or not this is in line with our educational values as we have set them out. What I will address during this talk today is how adaptive learning can use the development of domain knowledge. And I will emphasize that the development of domain knowledge, even in an age of AI, is still very crucial. So basic skills in reading and writing and mathematics are still very critical for our learners these days to develop. And adaptive learning technologies can help learners develop those in a somewhat more fluent way than previously done. So. Then next to the domain knowledge and fundamental skills, it's also very important for learners to develop self-regulated learning skills. So really make sure that learners are in fact adaptive learners themselves, equipped with the knowledge and skills that they need to change and being able to learn and change throughout their lives, which is very likely that in this transitional period, students will be required to be more flexible than in previous periods. And finally, I'll come to teachers and artificial intelligence and talk about how we can make sure that teachers are in fact not replaced by artificial intelligence, but complemented and augmented. How can we really help teachers thrive through the use of technology? And that's the last section I will talk about. But first, let us go to artificial intelligence and domain learning. And let's talk about how what we know from research about these different elements. Over the last decade, there have been quite a few of intelligent tutoring systems and adaptive learning technologies integrated in education throughout the world. So AI in education, in its educational AI form, has been around for decades. And in fact, throughout the world, been implemented already. quite a few people don't feel that that's AI education anymore, but in fact it is, and it's our most profound way of using artificial intelligence in educational domains. Now, in some parts of the world, and especially in American countries, we see a lot of intelligent tutoring systems in which students work with one computer, one student, which is a very individualistic approach to learning. In the Netherlands, we've been using adaptive learning technologies, which also use the capabilities of intelligent tutoring systems, but at the same time also maintain the collective nature of education. So what we do in these type of classrooms, as you can see here, is there is still classroom instruction by the teacher. He uses the smartboard, but at the same time, the instruction is still a human instruction activity. There's a classroom discussion about the different topics. Children are getting involved in the topics that they're studying. But at the same time, they're also using technologies to practice and to make sure that different practice activities are in fact attuned and aligned to the needs of individual students. So there's this combination of both the traditional elements of education that we really value, together with the new opportunities of technologies in classrooms. And if we look at that from a somewhat deeper perspective, there are actually three different forms of adaptivity that are used in classrooms. Technologies, especially when they're used for practicing, can help students with a problem that they're currently facing. And these technologies are already quite capable of detecting misconceptions and misunderstandings in students' reasoning. And that's what we call step adaptivity. We help students within solving a particular problem with the problems that they're currently facing. And systems are to some extent capable of addressing this. I have to say, in some cases, the teacher is still very much needed to elaborate and provide more profound and elaborate instructions. At a task level, systems can help students navigate their different assignments, and it can really make sure that students are in fact practicing at what we call their zone of proximal development, so really being challenged at the level that they can learn the best. Which means for some students that problems being selected are just a little bit more difficult than what they can do right now. And for other students, they'd like to be challenged, so problems become a lot more difficult. And depending on how students are working with the technology can guide them into a learning pathway that really fits their needs. And this is what happens at the task level. And then at the curriculum level, this is really about thinking which of the topics and learning goals within your math curriculum or reading curriculum should actually be aligned to the needs of the individual students, but also to the needs of the classroom. So not just optimizing for one student, but optimizing for the class that you're teaching and optimizing for the students in there. And the challenge is to find a balance between these two different types of technology usage in classrooms. We've been developing adaptive learning technologies within classrooms together with some commercial companies in the Netherlands over the last 10 years. And we've learned quite a bit about how teachers are implementing these technologies in classrooms. And we know that for students, they reach slightly higher learning gains while they're working with these technologies. But the most important element of this technology being implemented well in education is in fact the teacher. Because the teacher determines how he or she is using it in the classroom and determines how it aligns with how students in their classroom are in fact learning. We know from usage that especially the dashboard information being provided by these technologies, and you see some examples here on the slide, helps teachers to understand how students are in fact learning during their lessons. So it really helps them to see whether or not students are making the assignments that they were given correctly, which ones are still difficult, which students need additional help and instruction, and how are students in your classroom growing over time. And this information really profoundly changes the way that teachers are teaching in these classrooms. Before going to the classroom, they can look at the information to determine how much instruction and which instruction for a particular goal is in fact needed for their students. So that in this way they can tune the way they're making explanations in their classrooms. During the lesson, they can see which students are struggling, which are the students that are having problems understanding this information, and they can help these students with additional information as they go. And there's more attention for mastery, which students are in fact reaching and really understanding the material, and which students really need additional time. From our research across classrooms, we looked at how teachers are using dashboards and how it's changing their teaching behavior. And we see that teachers provide different types of that feedback. So they start to provide more task feedback and more process feedback to individual students. But they also start to help different students. Not every student in the classroom is always struggling at the same time. So this different allocation of feedback has been very powerful for teachers. It also helped teachers as a tool for professional development, because now in fact they can see whether or not students understood the instruction that they were given, and whether or not the students are in fact making progress. And it allows for more advanced differentiation practices. It helps teachers to determine how their group is developing and which elements and which students in the classroom would need more additional time and effort. So this teacher dashboard has been a great help. There's also a downside to it. It's quite difficult to start to learn and teach with these dashboards. So we see quite a diversity in how teachers are in fact using this information in their classrooms. And that aligns with this assessment that I'd like to show you. Most of the teachers in the Netherlands follow the direct instruction method for teaching. And that means that they're activating knowledge, discussing learning goals, providing instruction, do guided practice, individual practice, and then close. Now, as I explained, the first three elements of the classroom are still done without the technology. There could be a smartboard supporting, but most of this is still human activity. Then the guided and individual practice are activities that are done within the technologies, and the closing again is being done by the teacher. What we see is that AI is complementing teachers to understand better how their students are doing. So it's not replacing them, it's just helping them to arrive at a better instruction, understand better what the prior knowledge is that their students need to activate, and what the instruction should look like. During instruction, during practice time, there is partial replacement. Students receive direct feedback, and the assignments are tuned to the learning path of the student. But at the same time, the teacher plays a vital role in providing additional support and motivation for students to continue to work. And again, during the closing, with the additional information, teachers have much more information to actually reflect on what students have learned and have meaningful group activities, or maybe even collaborative activities within the classroom based on those. From this 10 years of work with adaptive technologies, we see that there is still quite a few things that can go better. So there are quite some new developments going on, and some of them are being developed within the National AI and Education Center. For instance, one of our projects is directed at aligning the different topics that students are working on within math classes better, so that they can assess which students need additional prior practice before starting a new learning goal, in order to make sure that the existing knowledge is there and students are not practicing a goal that's beyond their abilities. So within a number of different classrooms, teachers articulated this worry that sometimes they start a new learning goal even when students are still having missing information on the prior goals. And so in one of our co-creation projects, we're developing a way to assess whether or not students have the prior knowledge to start this new topic, so that if students need remedial practice prior to the lesson, they can do that. And we do this together with teachers, with scientists, and with businesses in order to ensure that the practice that is being developed is in fact connected in with the needs of the individual teachers. We also are working actively in a larger project, which is called a co-implementation project, together with a number of different adaptive technologies to work at what we call curriculum adaptivity. And this is exactly the problem that I just explained. We're trying to balance the curriculum. What you see here is the number of weeks of a math curriculum. And through AI and machine learning networks, based on the information of the last 10 years within the system makes a prediction of the most optimal curriculum for your classroom. So it optimizes which activities you can do in your classroom to reach the best results. Now, of course, this is a very important teacher task to develop curriculum. Oftentimes, curriculum is developed both in the materials that you're using, in the guidelines by the ministry, and at the same time optimized in the classroom, depending on the needs of your individual students. In this particular case, the AI helps to make predictions on how to make the best results. But again, teachers are very much involved both in the design of this new setup as well as in the actual refinement of this prediction while they're working with it. So you see, they can actually drag and drop all the different lesson elements and specify different lessons and integrate different lessons according to their individual needs and observations. And underneath this, there is the information of the whole curriculum indicating where students in this particular classroom are on the different learning goals and how that aligns with their needs, specifying specific suggestions for the teacher on how to optimize the actual learning outcomes of this particular group of students. And that allows for a set curriculum, but also optimization within the classroom and optimization for individual students, and balancing the two elements together. And we're developing this together with 150 teachers to make sure that this is actually aligned to the way that they are developing their lessons, curriculums, and activities for students. And we do this in short cycles of 6 weeks, in which we do innovation both at the technology side as well as at the pedagogical practice side. And we make sure that we are in the classrooms to understand how they're using it, how it's changing their instructional and pedagogical practices, and how that together can be optimized towards new practices. So I'd like to conclude this particular part with indicating that there are different forms of adaptivity that are still under development. Most technologies are good at one of the levels of adaptivity that I introduced, but increasingly they're being combined, and that causes new challenges in how to make these combinations effectively. There's an incredibly important role of teachers, even when using these technologies in classrooms, as they are still the core driver of education, and the technologies can be used to complement and augment existing teacher activities. Co-creation and co-implementation, both as approaches, are very helpful in developing new technologies for education, but they're also pointed towards their benefits for teacher professional development. So it also really helps us to train teachers and understand their needs and their ways of working with these new technologies. And therefore, we put a large focus on teacher autonomy while we are creating these technologies, and using also professional teacher coaches that are teachers that are coaching on these activities within the schools, as well as our teacher in residence program, which means that we have teachers come in to our lab 1 day a week and work with us on both the scientific and on the development activities. And the rest of the 4 days of the week, they are teaching in their classrooms. And this really makes sure that we have this ongoing connection between teachers, professional development, and the actual development of the technology. So that is the section about the importance of domain knowledge and how we can use domain knowledge and fundamental skills and amplify them with technology in different ways in classrooms. I would also like to turn to the section on adaptive learners, because it's also critical importance that learners are in fact developing self-regulatory skills to be able to learn themselves throughout their lives. And here I'd like to highlight the important work of Professor Kao, who has been working quite a lot here on self-regulated learning and the interaction between the self-regulated learning elements and how technology can in fact mediate self-regulation in learners. And in this way, the combination of technology and driving not only for domain-specific knowledge, but also for self-regulated learning knowledge is being amplified. And this is very important because some of these technologies that have been developed tend to do the opposite. They in fact tend to describe the learning to students and thereby offloading the need to regulate your own learning. And I think this is some development that we need to be very careful of. Because self-regulated learning, the ability to monitor and control your own learning activities, is a super crucial element for students to be able to learn later throughout their lives. And so once we start offloading self-regulated learning to systems, I think that is the wrong direction. And I'm very happy to see how here there has been a lot of emphasis on actually using the technology as a mediator to teach students to develop these important self-regulated learning skills. And the study that I outline here on the slide has also emphasized clearly that it can be done in an efficient way. And that's, I think, a unique contribution from your team. So it's very nice to see your work there. We've been working quite a lot on the measurement of self-regulated learning activities, and that can be done with a multitude of different data streams that are currently available in these technologies. So you can use data in the form of self-report, asking students how they were regulating, but you can also use the log data from the system, eye tracking, mouse and keyboard data, and potentially even EDA and EEG data to understand how students are regulating their own behavior. And increasingly over time, we see that multiple data streams have been combined in order to measure these activities. And one way to do that is the Flora engine, which has already also been implemented here in Taiwan. And what we do there is we in fact measure cognitive and metacognitive activities that students are executing while they are learning. And so we understand when they're reading, rereading, and writing, but we also understand when they're orientating, planning, monitoring, and evaluating. And in this way, we start to understand much better how different learning processes interact while students are engaging in learning activities. And this is important information for the support of learners while they are learning. And so we can support learners by providing them the information back in different dashboards. And so I've discussed teacher-faced dashboards in the previous section, but also learner-faced dashboards are important elements for learners to engage in and understand how their own learning activity are related to how they are learning. I will talk a little bit more about how we use these dashboards in classrooms to give you an idea of how it can help in instructional design and the development of self-regulated learning activities. We also developed different scaffolding approaches in which, based on the measurements from the system, we provide students with additional prompts to help them regulate their own learning. And so, for instance, the understanding of the task could be a prompt for students to really read the instructions better and understand better what the different tasks are about. And depending on how they are performing their self-regulated learning activities, how the measurement is, we're cueing learners to do so. And then in the ultimate form, ideally, and we're currently still working on that, and this is not yet in the classrooms, we're working on dialogic interactions with agents to support students in their self-regulated learning activities, which is one of the things that I think we can do better today than we could previously. If we work on self-regulated learning activities for learners, we work from theoretical foundations about how students are regulating their learning. And what you see here on the slide is a theoretical model on SRL, and based on this model, where task definition, goal setting, monitoring and control, and adaptation are crucial elements, we design technology elements that support learners to engage in these different activities. So every time we develop the technology, we both use a theoretical contribution from learning sciences in understanding how students are in fact learning, and we're contemplating on how to reuse technology elements to stimulate different activities. And I think that is an approach that has also been followed here in Taiwan. And that is really interesting because you can actually see that when students have problems with, for instance, goal setting, which is a very important activity during learning, we engage them in goal setting questionnaires, which are then being used to set goals prior to the activity. And then if they have set the goals, they can continue working on those while they are learning. And that helps them to understand this learner-faced dashboard that is helping students to write better essays. And in this case, the students were writing an essay about the future of artificial intelligence in education. They were coined to work both on structure elements, relevant elements, and integrate a number of main points in their actual writing assignment. They had to complete a number of different sub-goals, and based on this information that you see here, students could see if they were in fact reaching the criteria that were set out for the assignment, and they could see when they have reached them. So for instance, for structure, they could see that the definition of AI was being reached around 24 minutes during their learning episode. And in this way, they could reflect back on how they regulated around these different elements of their essay and how they managed to both control and monitor their activities as well as activate and translate it into their essays. And this tool is being used in Dutch classrooms in order to help students develop these important self-regulatory skills. And what is really interesting is that we see that students are, one, not aware of how they're doing these activities. Two, we can create a number of activities within the classrooms to really elicit them to talk about this. And so a typical lesson plan that we created around this with a number of different teachers is to do a lesson to familiarize yourself with the dashboards, then do a writing session, understanding how this information is in fact supporting you. Then we do a full lesson on reflection and setting goals using the dashboard and understanding how different students use different writing strategies and how with different strategies they did reach different criteria. And in this way, students understand that everybody has their own learning approach, uses strategies differently, and learns to set new goals for their next writing episode. And then in the next writing episode, they try to change their actual writing strategies and really revise towards new approaches, which is then again in the last lesson being reflected on. And through this integration with the technology, together with the teachers developing a lesson sequence, we're really sort of helping teachers to integrate this new technology into their day-to-day practices, but also help students to understand how their writing process is coming into place and what the importance of writing is. Because writing, of course, helps you to think, and it really helps you to revise your ideas. And therefore, we find this a very critical element, which is even more under pressure, at least in the Netherlands, with students having access to large language models on a daily basis, which really puts us into a place where students feel it's really difficult and maybe also not necessary to learn to write anymore, which I feel is a very big threat for us. I also would like to take you to another integration where we also work on helping students develop self-regulated learning skills. This is a typical classroom situation. What you see here, and that's also why I put the picture in here, is a child's learning basic mathematics in adaptive learning technology, but you also see they're still writing out on paper, so they still have the notepad in front of them. And on this left side, you also see that she, in this case, has a dashboard in which she can see how well she is performing and how well she is making progress. And this combination really helps students to be both motivated but also actively self-regulate their learning. And as we did with the previous example, also here we are using the self-regulated learning theory. And underneath that, we're thinking very carefully about how we can help students to regulate their own activities. So again, together with the practice activities that they're doing in the math adaptive learning technology, which is in the middle, there's additional information for students to understand how their own learning activities are making contributions and how they are driving towards understanding the learning topics that they're working on. And what is interesting in this particular situation is that we make very explicit to the student what the student is doing themselves to regulate their learning, but also what the artificial intelligence is doing. So the AI is helping them with providing feedback and making the assignments more difficult or easier for them. But students also themselves make a lot of decisions while they are learning. Am I going to put in an effort? Am I motivated? Do I actually try a new strategy? And so we're trying to visualize to them how the AI is helping them, but also how they can improve their learning themselves. And so within visualizing this teaming of artificial intelligence and students, we're trying to develop their self-regulated learning activities in classrooms. And we also allow students to choose different levels of support. So again, we can have the AI replace the self-regulated learning of the student completely, then the AI just finds your most optimal learning path. But ideally, I want students to be more active. So we help students to monitor their own learning behavior in different degrees. So once they really are capable of going through the AI-regulated layer, we are starting to reduce the support of the AI and try to transfer it back to learners to really develop the monitoring activities to understand their own learning activities and eventually also provide control over the AI back to the learners so that they can, in fact, make meaningful suggestions on how to collaborate together with the artificial intelligence. This is still very much under development. We're still working on these different layers in which we help students either in an AI-regulated layer in which the focus is completely on the domain knowledge and skill development, or in co-regulation and shared regulation, where we also allow students to develop monitoring skills in co-regulation and develop control activities and strategy skills in shared regulation. And we're still trying to find the right balance between these different degrees to really optimize students' learning, both on the domain knowledge side as well as on these important self-regulatory skills. And just to give you a bit of an idea, there's a lot of AI behind all of this, because this is, for instance, the new algorithms that we developed to do the AI regulation, in which we have machine learning models develop different clusters of students with different learning trajectories that then need different approaches within the platform to be able to support their learning, and also need different approaches from teachers. So apart from the AI backend that you're looking at here, there's also a new teacher dashboard aligned with all this information that helps teachers also understand both the domain development as well as the self-regulated learning development of their learners in order to combine these different elements. In this way, we are creating a relationship between the learner and the technology in which the functioning of the AI is informing the learner about their own learning and self-regulation, but it's also helping learners to learn better and faster in these environments. And with this section, I'd like to move to another element and part. As I said in the beginning of the talk, there is a distinction between educational AI, which I showed quite a few examples of now, in which we really develop artificial intelligence solutions together with teachers to be equipped for classrooms. But there's also generative AI being used, at least in the Netherlands, by a lot of the students in classroom. So this next section is more about the general purpose artificial intelligence and the effects on learners. So there is, as I said, educational AI and generative AI that are being two distinct elements of artificial intelligence in classrooms. And what we see in the Netherlands is that a lot of students are in fact in search of balance. So we find that students use generative AI and large language models to a large extent to do their homework. I don't know if you experience that problem here as well, but this has been a bit of a challenge in the Netherlands. And before a good grade would depend on learner efforts. Currently, good grades can be achieved by having AI do your homework and without putting in the effort needed. And so students really have a choice. Do I want a good grade or do I want to learn? And we see quite a lot of students moving into the space where they are in fact performing well but not really being challenged to learn. And I think one of the big questions that we have today is how do we help students to use AI in a way that is not just, supporting their learning, but about supporting the performance, but also really supporting their learning. And so we find that our learners, at least in the Netherlands, are searching for a new balance, and we hope that their self-regulated learning skills are in fact in place so that they can find this particular balance. We're currently doing a large study with the CELA team, the Center for Learning and Living with AI, across the world to see how students are in fact navigating this learn-perform balance in order to make progress. I just saw that I have 5 minutes left for the last section of this talk, so I'll speed it up a little bit. If we talk about teachers and artificial intelligence, we know that human-AI collaboration is still very much under development. So in studies not being done in education, this is a study in nature and human behavior, we see that artificial intelligence together with humans in 85% of the time leads to better results than humans alone. So that's good news. But synergy, so having AI and humans together create a better solution than either one of them alone, is only happening in 42% of the chance of the studies of this particular study. Which means that it's still very challenging to create situations in which artificial intelligence and humans are together creating better results than either one of these actors could have done by themselves before. And that means that human-AI collaboration is still a field to be developed. And it's especially true for education, because in education, the level of automation, the jobs that are going to be replaced, tasks that are going to be replaced by AI is only limited. And there's very few professions, if you look at all the professions here from the OECD, that in fact have such a low replacement rate as education. So human-AI collaboration is going to be extremely important in education. And so the replacement perspective of AI replacing teachers is much less likely than the complementation and augmentation perspective, as I've already argued for. But that also means that teachers need to balance how to use the technology and really are driving the control in this new space. And that requires teachers that really understand how to use the technology in a way that is actually amplifying their own skills. We see a number of things happening. We see that AI can replace part of a teacher task, for instance, by providing direct feedback immediately to students, or by aligning those problems as I explained earlier. But AI also often complements and provides teachers with additional information and helps them to see how students are developing, helping teachers to do their job better. And then together, if we develop together with teachers, we see that in fact the pedagogical practices in the classroom change. And so we see that AI is also augmenting teachers to create new practices. And I'm just going to give you one last example before I round up. If I may, in the time, I guess. Yes. We have one co-creation project that is looking at checking open questions with artificial intelligence. It takes a lot of time for teachers to grade the answers from students. Students value the feedback, they learn through the feedback, but it's also a time-consuming activity. So before teachers would develop test questions, they would create an answer model, they would have to score it by hand, and then they would have to grade all the text, all the tests. Right now, what the artificial intelligence is helping teachers to do is develop the test questions, also adjust the question model, and then mostly reviewing the suggested scores. So what you see here is that there is a partial teaming between the AI and the human, especially helping teachers to compare the questions of the students and to make an overview of the most often made mistakes. And that can help teachers again to teach what was being misunderstood by students. So even with the grading of open questions, the human-AI collaboration is very critical. Teachers can use the AI, but they still play an important role in doing the final grading of the students' answers. And understanding how students were performing on the test is, of course, very crucial for their activities. And that brings me to my final slide. The hybrid future is really about balancing artificial intelligence models and teachers' competences, and really trying to understand how they can come together, both by looking at how these technologies are changing tasks in the classroom, whether there's replacement, complementation, or augmentation, how they are changing the skills of the teacher, which skills are being reduced, which skills are being intensified, which new skills do teachers need, and that, in the end, is going to lead to a changed job profile of teachers. How can we create teachers that work with more fun, have more job satisfaction, have a sustainable employable model, and deliver higher quality? And in that space, we need human-AI collaboration, where the functioning of the AI can help teachers and inform teachers, can act towards students, and between the student and the teacher, there still are the important instructional practices that really make education a human activity, which I think is something that we value across the world. So thank you very much for your attention. I talked about curriculum development and AI, especially curriculum adaptivity. We talked about assessment and testing for both domain knowledge and self-regulated learning. And I briefly touched upon the teaching innovation and teacher education elements that are needed in this transitional space. Of course, this work is available to you in our new AI in Education magazine, which is available online to download, and I brought a copy also here to share. And this work cannot be done without the great teams that are supporting me in doing the work. Thank you very much.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please, another round of big applause for Professor Morena for her wonderful and insightful presentation.
谢谢黄董事长的主持与 Professor Morena 的演讲，请两位移步至台前，与我们的黄坤辉董事长一起合影留念。
你看这边还有毕节二毛。看这边，是啊，这边董事长看一下这边，谢谢，这边，哎，谢谢。